Hello guys, I'm Tom, and today we'll see who the Hollow Man really is. In the vast and fascinating universe of contemporary science fiction and horror cinema, there are characters who become unforgettable not only because of what they show on screen, but also because of what they hide behind their appearance, the secrets and shadows they project in our minds long after the lights go out. One of these iconic characters is Sebastian Caine, better known as the Hollow Man, a man wrapped in physical invisibility, yes, but who at the same time chillingly reveals the darkest, most disturbing, and deepest aspects of the human soul. Sebastian Caine was not simply a brilliant scientist. He was an arrogant genius, a man with extraordinary intelligence who put it at the service of the United States government in one of its most secret and delicate projects, funded directly by the Pentagon. But behind that prodigious mind hid an excessive ego, a voracious ambition, and an absolute disregard for any moral norm or the well-being of those around him. His thirst for power and control was so great that any ethical limit seemed irrelevant to him. From his first encounters with his team, Caine's true nature was clear. He was condescending, cold, incapable of showing even the slightest empathy. His professional relationships were marked by tension and distrust. But the turning point came when his team achieved what seemed impossible, developing a serum capable of making any living being invisible. The news could have been a monumental scientific triumph, but Caine, blinded by his own arrogance, decided to use the serum on himself regardless of the consequences, breaking all established safety and ethical protocols. That impulsive and selfish act not only broke the rules, but also unleashed something much darker within him. From that moment on, Sebastian Caine ceased to be an ordinary human being and transformed into an invisible predator, a figure completely surrendered to chaos, violence, and the destruction of his own humanity. His scientific brilliance turned into madness, his intellect into manipulation, and his ethics into non-existence. Caine became a sociopath without limits, someone who no longer answered to any law, not even morality. In this video, we will take a deep dive into the evolution of this dark character. We will trace his story as told in the movie Hollow Man, revealing that his downfall was not only the result of the serum that made him invisible, but the manifestation of an internal corruption that accompanied him long before the transformation. We will explore his psychological descent, his most disturbing acts, his exceptional abilities, and the few but crucial weaknesses that made him a living nightmare for those around him. The story begins in a high-security underground laboratory, where a group of scientists is working on a classified project funded by the US government. The goal is clear and ambitious: to create a formula that allows soldiers and animals to become invisible in order to gain a strategic advantage on the battlefield. Sebastian Caine leads this elite team, which includes his ex-partner, Dr. Linda McKay, whose relationship with Caine adds personal tension to the already complex scientific environment. In the early phases, they conduct tests on monkeys that manage to become invisible, but alarming side effects quickly emerge. The animals become aggressive, unpredictable, and dangerous. To control the situation, the team uses advanced technology like thermal sensors and infrared goggles, but this only works as a temporary patch. The biggest problem remains. Reversing the invisibility proves to be a monumental challenge, and more than once, failed attempts end in bloody and tragic consequences. Meanwhile, in the solitude of his apartment, Caine begins experimenting on his own. His obsession grows, and his personal life deteriorates as he secretly spies on his neighbor, a behavior that reflects his ethical and emotional collapse. Eventually, he manages to synthesize a compound that could reverse invisibility, but he chooses not to share this discovery with the rest of the team or his superiors, keeping it to himself. In a critical meeting with the Pentagon, Caine lies without scruples, claiming that the serum is still unstable and that reversal is impossible. His mentor, Dr. Kenner, shows his disappointment, but grants him a few more days to present results. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Caine proposes to conduct a secret human test, volunteering himself, determined to maintain absolute control and take all the glory. The procedure is painful and dangerous, but he manages to disappear before everyone's eyes. However, invisibility brings new problems. His invisible eyelids cause extreme light sensitivity, forcing the lab to reduce lighting so he can function. But the greatest threat is not physical. It is Caine's psychology that begins to irreparably fracture. Caine begins abusing his invisibility, playing cruel pranks, and behaving more and more invasively and disturbingly. His true nature emerges without filters. The situation reaches a critical point when, one night, he sneaks into a sleeping colleague's room and touches her without consent. She almost wakes up, but fails to identify him. This act marks the end of his humanity and the beginning of his descent into madness. When the team tries to reverse the process, the serum fails catastrophically, putting Caine's life at risk and condemning him to remain invisible indefinitely. His mind disintegrates, and his acts become increasingly violent and dangerous. To interact with the world, he begins wearing a latex mask and dark goggles, an image that, far from humanizing him, turns him into a terrifying and grotesque figure. Physical symptoms pile up: constant nausea, insomnia, radiation-related problems, and prolonged exposure to extreme conditions. But it is mental deterioration that pushes him to the edge of the abyss. His violent outbursts and fits of rage culminate in the destruction of the laboratory. He is no longer a team member. He is an imminent and uncontrollable threat. Finally, on a night full of tension, Caine escapes the lab and returns to his apartment, a place that once represented his refuge and now becomes the scene of terror. Even the neighborhood children feel his presence, unaware that they are in front of an invisible and dangerous being, a soulless shadow that has abandoned any vestige of humanity. In the absolute solitude and privacy of his apartment, far from the watchful eyes of his colleagues and superiors, Sebastian Caine once again succumbs to his darkest and most disturbing impulses. What begins as a quiet and seemingly harmless act, spying on his neighbor while cloaked in the invisibility granted by the serum, quickly escalates to alarming and deeply sinister levels. Confident in the absolute power his invisibility provides, and convinced that no one will ever be able to see him or prove his atrocities, Caine makes a chilling decision. He breaks into the woman's home while she sleeps to sexually assault her, an act of extreme perversity that reflects not only his moral decay, but also the dangerous combination of unchecked power and the total absence of consequences. For Caine, invisibility is not merely a physical shield, but a guarantee of impunity, because he knows his victims will lack credibility. No one can accuse a predator who literally cannot be seen. After committing this horrific atrocity, Caine returns to the underground laboratory, where he works with his scientific team, trying to maintain a facade of normality. But his absence has not gone unnoticed. Linda, his ex-partner and fellow researcher, along with the rest of the team, firmly and anxiously confront him. They warn him that if he disappears without authorization again, they'll have no choice but to inform Dr. Kemmer, the head of the project, putting both his position and the future of the experiment at risk. However, Caine's mind is increasingly consumed by paranoia, rage, and instability. In the days that follow, as the team frantically works to find a cure that could reverse the effects of the serum, the continued failures only heighten Caine's irritability and unpredictability. His already fractured mind becomes fertile ground for violence and despair. Taking advantage of a moment of carelessness, Caine sabotages the surveillance camera installed in the room specially designed for him, and escapes the lab once more, moving through the darkness of night with the impunity granted by his invisible state. On one of these nocturnal outings, he discovers, consumed by fury and jealousy, that Linda, his ex-girlfriend, has begun a relationship with Matt, one of his closest colleagues. This revelation ignites an explosive mix of rage, jealousy, and frustration in him, all intensified by the fragile mental health he suffers due to the serum's side effects and the insomnia caused by his invisible eyelids. In a gesture that symbolizes his complete dehumanization, Caine loses all control and commits a cruel and irrational act. He murders a barking dog without any reason, demonstrating that his fury now knows no limits or justifications. As days pass, the team begins to notice disturbing patterns. The security cameras have been tampered with, and Caine's absences become more frequent and prolonged. Matt and Linda, alarmed by Caine's progressive deterioration and increasing danger, decide to report the situation to Dr. Kemmer. After hearing their concerns, Kemmer makes the difficult decision to remove Caine from the project to protect both the team and the scientific advancement. But Caine, always one step ahead, is not willing to surrender. In a desperate act to retain control, he follows Kemmer to his home and brutally murders him in the swimming pool, making sure to silence any possibility of outside intervention. This act confirms that Sebastian Caine has crossed the threshold into absolute madness and criminality. Now fully consumed by his insanity, Caine devises a macabre plan to eliminate the entire scientific team and escape without leaving any witnesses behind. The next day, he blocks all communications and disables the elevator of the bunker where they work, trapping his colleagues and initiating a deadly hunt inside the claustrophobic facility. His first victim is Janice, who had briefly separated from the group to look for her thermal goggles. Caine ambushes her, strangles her mercilessly, and hides her body in the darkness of the lab. Janice's disappearance spreads panic and confusion among the survivors. Linda, Sarah, and Frank go into hiding while Matt and Carter, armed with tranquilizers, prepare to mount a defense against their former colleague turned monster. In a violent ambush, Caine slashes Carter's neck severely and nearly kills Matt, until Linda manages to open an emergency door and rescue him. But the tragedy continues. Sarah, trying to help Carter, comes face to face with Caine, who without hesitation snaps her neck with brutal force. Later, when Frank lets his guard down, Caine kills him with a crowbar, a scene that reflects his growing thirst for destruction and senseless violence. Eventually, Caine locks Linda and Matt in a freezer chamber, initiating his final plan: to blow up the laboratory with homemade nitroglycerin explosives. But with ingenuity and determination, Linda and Matt manage to free themselves using an improvised electromagnet, build a makeshift flamethrower, and prepare for the final showdown against the invisible man who is no longer human. In the climactic confrontation, just as Caine is about to kill them, they strike back with a crowbar. Though they manage to wound him, Caine quickly recovers and retaliates with extreme violence. Matt, in a last desperate effort, pushes Caine into an electrical panel, causing a surge that renders him partially visible for brief moments, an image both terrifying and revealing. Knowing the explosion is imminent, Linda and Matt flee through the emergency staircase. Caine reappears in a final, desperate attempt to stop them, grabbing Linda by the ankle and pulling her down. In a disorienting moment, he kisses her with a mix of nostalgia and farewell, remembering the past they once shared and the humanity he once had. Seizing that brief distraction, Linda manages to destabilize the elevator and free herself, left hanging from a cable. Caine tries to hold on, but slips and falls to the bottom of the bunker just as the facility begins to explode. Linda and Matt escape in time and are rescued by emergency services, leaving behind the hell that Sebastian Caine had become. Thus ends the disturbing and tragic story of a man whose legacy was buried beneath the rubble of the laboratory where his monstrosity was born. After exploring the events that marked his fall, it's crucial to delve into the psychology and true nature of Sebastian Caine. Even before being consumed by invisibility, Caine was already an arrogant and egocentric individual who saw himself as superior to his peers, openly humiliating them and showing absolute contempt. His behavior was unpleasant, condescending, even offensive, frequently making inappropriate sexual jokes and cruel remarks, such as the morbid suggestion to dissect a gorilla that had just become visible again, just to upset Sarah, the team's veterinarian. Despite his twisted morals, there was no denying his scientific brilliance, a genius tainted by an outsized ego and complete lack of ethics. As his sanity unraveled, his obsession with controlling what he couldn't possess became increasingly evident, from obsessively spying on his ex-girlfriend to stalking his neighbor. Once invisible, Caine transforms from an arrogant egotist into a monster without limits or restraint, using his power to stalk, manipulate, and commit increasingly violent and dangerous acts. His rage manifests in destruction, senseless violence, and the cold-blooded murder of his own teammates. A key detail that reveals his twisted sense of humor is a joke he tells before his transformation about Superman and Wonder Woman, suggesting sexual assault under the cover of invisibility, with the punchline being that the victim was actually the Invisible Man. This joke not only reveals his misogyny and ethical void, but also foreshadows the horrors he would later unleash.